Hey guys, DF here. Hope you're doing well. I'm back with another review, this time on Fire Emblem Engage. This review of Fire Emblem Engage is going to be a bit unorthodox compared to how I usually structure my reviews, particularly because I don't want to make this review longer than intended. I'll dive into the main criticisms I have for the game, then head into what the game does well. Let's begin. The game does not have a lot of room to experiment with classes, and by this I mean there is a high cost at 2.5k to buy a master and second seal to change into other classes. However, if you buy the DLC then, these seals among other items and armory items are 30% off. I find the high cost to experiment more with classes to be a detriment. There are a lot of classes to choose from, and I would have liked the ease to switch between any of them. The cost for either is simply too high. At 2.5k each, the game simply doesn't throw enough money at you to buy seals at your own leisure. Granted, the game does give you free seals, and sometimes when you open chests or finish a chapter, but you cannot count on either of these instances when both options are not available upon completing a chapter. Sure, you can get bonus money from receiving military funds from each nation, but using them on donation seems a far better investment. By donating to a country, you can see a higher gold yield in fighting skirmishes there, so your return on investment is pretty good, although this isn't balanced well, because you can be out of money to buy other materials you may need to upgrade weapons, buy items, healing items, like vulneraries or staves first, and then what are you left with in the end? Zero money. This leads me to another point. If the high cost is an issue, then surely the game has a solution or band-aid for it, right? You're right, except you need to pay the expansion pass for the first wave in granting you a silver card, which reduces all prices in item and armory shops by 30%. Which comes out to 1750 seal price each, which is better than having to pay 2.5k. However, the fact you have to buy the DLC to access the silver card is not a band-aid solution. It enforces a policy of buying into the expansion pass to reduce the shop prices by 30% and granting you other emblems, stat boosting items, and more. And sure, some might see it as a worthy investment since you get more than you wanted as a whole package with DLC waves too. However, it still doesn't excuse the fact the silver card is an item exclusive to the DLC, and as far as I know, you cannot obtain a silver card in the base game. My suggestions to tweak this would be to lower seals to 1750 or lower and increase gold rewards, whether by completing in-game story chapters or skirmishes to give a flat rate. Sure, you can go up against skirmishes that drop gold, but what about normal skirmishes? In my playthrough, I had to rely on a certain character due to her skill granting me a chance for bonus gold. An increase in gold rewards and a decrease in pricing for seals would be nice. Perhaps in a patch? Well, let's wait and see. Moving on. Inheriting SP skills are too expensive for some skills. It takes 1 to 3k skill points to build enough for one unit, and even then you may only get to inherit one skill right at the end game. Sure, you could pay a small amount of SP for skills below 1000 or below 3000. However, other skills can cost 4 to 5k. Yes, there are ways to increase SP points by using emblem skills like Great Sacrifice and other skills. However, the cost in these higher tiers is simply too much. How can I experiment with my classes when the skills I want cost too much? An easy way to remedy this could have been lowering SP skills costs and increasing SP gain to offset this weird imbalance between heavily priced SP skills and the low gain to increase SP points. Next, let's talk about the story. It's subpar and has a lot of lows. When I mean the story is subpar and has a lot of lows, I mean it. It game primarily holds the player into a fantasy world to entrench into the nostalgia-bait nature of previous titles in the series, from the first Fire Emblem to the last entry, Fire Emblem Three Houses. Sure, it's a new world with new characters, and with their history, with stakes and consequences that do occur in the game, and yet the story relies too heavily on the Divine Dragon to solve every single problem throughout Helios. I found the formula and other structures which I won't go into too much detail about due to spoilers, copy and paste throughout, and this is repeated again and again as you travel to each new area until you make a full circle back to your starting location once again in Helios. Granted, there are moments I'll give the story where I was surprised and didn't expect, but having silly solutions you can see a mile away from teasing you early on simply doesn't work, and when I look at a plot, especially in an early game, there will come a point where too many cards are shown, where the next plot device such as villains, antagonists, and revelations nearly becomes transparent to the naked eye, and while some may favor this approach like I do, the execution here leaves much to be desired. It's as if I'm being held by the hand or fed breadcrumbs to a door where I can see what will happen next. I'm not all-knowing, however, and I can't predict everything. But I kid you not, when you have a mysterious hooded person plus another unknown character in the next following scene, that doesn't show a great amount of subtlety, and this is displayed pretty early on. There are also, I would say, 2 points during the endgame where I was shaking my head by introducing a trope I love, but poorly executed in a vain attempt to come back to the roots of where we started, and another issue where the problem could not be resolved without the Divine Dragon once again coming to save the day or figure out the solution to said problem. Some suggested improvements I could think of off the top of my head I'll say later on in the review. But for now, let's move on. The world building is too simple and doesn't engage the player enough. Overworld map structure is indicative of this. What I mean world building is too simple, I mean how the world of Helios when looking at the map is just lazy writing in general. It's constructed as a circle and we get an early exposition of how the world came to be and the emblems. Another game that I had played previously had a different shape, was called Triangle Strategy, for you guessed it, a triangle in the overworld map. I had the same critique over there for that game, but for different reasons. But that's a story for another day. Back to Engage. We don't get enough on the world's politics, if any. We don't get much character background or relationship between each nation's leaders and their current agenda beyond the early exposition again. When a leader is mentioned, they are quickly forgotten for the sake of the plot and, of course, the main character's party to move on. I wanted to know more about Barodia's lifestyle. Any information on Firene's king? Or another nation's leader's missing spouse or wife? Why aren't pets used more in the lore? You can just adopt them and then that's it? History of the emblems and more is given in the game, but what about any instances of emblem usage in the past? Like, show me past battles where so-so nations fought for an emblem. There is always discussion or mention of events 1,000 years ago. What about flashbacks and more? Like seeing how Barodia attacks Elusia or Solm and Firene's relationship. No deities, no unnatural events upsetting gods. Oh wait, never mind. We need to worship the Divine Dragon. Who cares about all that other stuff? Let us pray to the Divine Dragon. The game plays way too safe with copy-paste formulas. Not going to say exactly what they are in case of spoilers, but there is a rinse and repeat formula as you delve deeper into chapters, and I already said what I needed to say earlier in the story section. Honestly, the game would have benefited a lot more with more risks to the story and sequence of events that follow. As I continued on to each new nation, it quickly became apparent what will happen next in rinse and repeat fashion. Next, recruits you come across throughout the game don't test the main character enough due to their divinity. They should have deconstructed the divinity aspect, made them have more flaws, make them struggle, and keep them from being so perfect. This ties back to the divine dragon solving everyone's problems. I can remember moments in the game where the main character will falter, but guys, don't worry, the power of friendship will make them overcome their failings so they can give us ideas, and we just gotta follow him or her. Don't question it. He or she is the divine dragon. They can do it. We just need to follow them. We'll beat everyone with them on our side. Oh my god, it's the divine dragon. Forgive my candor, please. Oh, divine dragon, please help us. Good lord, there is too much of this reverence and worship of the very ground they walk. This isn't exactly what is said in the game, merely paraphrased. Honestly, the game would have benefited a lot more if we didn't worship the guy or lady and focus more on each other's flaws. Give me someone who hates the divine dragon in our party, who will constantly butt heads. Heck, a rival or other divine dragon that is too casual and selfish and everything, not the main character, to be a foil. Make our new allies test the main character constantly. Leave our party, gather support against their idea, to go with their own idea. Give me moments when our divine dragon isn't so divine. Despair in these scenes. Show the consequences of his flaws more. Make party members desert them, or anything to make the divine dragon more than a goody two-shoes out to save every nation and recruit everyone to their cause. I could list more, but I think you all get the picture. It's like the developers took everything positive and can do no wrong with the main character, and gave very slight flaws that could be easily overcome, and bam! They can do it and solve your problem. This is where the story, plot, and more start to fall apart, and where the crevices become even larger to see the shallowness. All of the above tied together demonstrate a game where the main character is interconnected and used in such a way that they will solve numerous problems as you progress through the story, again and again. We come upon a new solution from the one and only Holy Divine Dragon, and sure, I get the game is geared to be less so serious and more lighthearted compared to the predecessors, but it's repetitive and overused, and honestly fails to capture my interest, since I already know what will happen next, and because of my suspension of disbelief being blasted into space. Now, let's talk about spoilers abound for past Fire Emblem characters from their respective games and paralogues. Some spoil more than others. I particularly did not appreciate a big spoiler drop without any warning after Chapter 3 story battle, in my honest opinion. I'm not going to describe the spoiler to prevent others being spoiled, but I'm going to say where it is to locate it just in case they don't want to hear it. So here it is. There is a point, especially in a post-Chapter 3 story battle, where a character from an earlier title spoils something from their respective game. I haven't personally played that Fire Emblem entry, so I was incredibly frustrated since I was already careful not playing the mobile game, actively avoided reading in the wiki, and the internet on spoilers from past games, only for the newest game to blurt it out. It's unforgivable, especially in a story cutscene. I was looking forward to playing that specific game in the near future in a blind playthrough, so my feelings were really soured by this. Some paralogues also spoil some events from their respective games via dialogue. Since I haven't played every title in the series, it's unreasonable to assume every newcomer will play every game, especially since some old games can only be played via fan translations, and the rest via emulation or buying in their respective digital stores. To be transparent, I have not played Fire Emblem 4, 5, Marth games, Fates, or Echoes. The rest I have played. I've also taken the liberty of categorizing the paralogues I have played that I feel are safe for newcomers. They are Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade and Fire Emblem Three Houses. Paralogues somewhat spoilery? I feel this can depend on the person if they don't mind or do mind certain aspects. But the paralogues are Fire Emblem Binding Blade and Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. For paralogues, I feel do spoil some important elements from their games. They are Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. I understand Engage has main characters from past titles and will utilize them to some degree within the game. However, I did not expect huge spoiler bombs. All I ask is a simple indicator or warning on the screen to let me know about information related to their respective games and if they have anything concerning their plot, and Engage gives no warnings about this. For titles I haven't played, I did not play their respective paralogues in fear of something spoiling me of their plots, story, important details in regards to their character, etc. I'd rather find out what happens in their own games. Granted, some do not mind spoilers and this is fine. However, some are more sensitive to that type of information like me. Case in point, players who like to dive into games completely blind, and semi-blind players who do not mind certain aspects of a game to know. Next, the soundtrack isn't really a high bar here. The music in the game isn't all that memorable outside of perhaps a handful of tracks, and there are too many melodies or tunes that I find didn't mesh well with scenes or tried too hard to be epic and moving with orchestral instruments, but it fails to capture me in the spirit during the game. Earlier I talked about the main character, their divinity and worshippers. To add to that, there are two early game characters who did not endear me at all. Why? Fan Club and their devotion to the Divine Dragon. They were watching the main character wake up and talk to them is such a red flag to me. The fact you get these two characters right at the beginning of the game did not help matters at all. I didn't want to label them as fanboy and fangirl of the Divine Dragon since I didn't see their supports yet. But when I did, and granted I didn't see all the support logs, and I'm sure they have other qualities outside of a fan club for the Divine Dragon, but seeing these conversations where they're trying to garner more fans for the Divine Dragon fan club shows how there is a weird, devoted fan aspect to the main character. This also extends to mostly every character I've met and recruited in the game so far, to worship them to varying degrees. Which is kinda disturbing. These matters don't help at all when the game includes wake-up events, when you sleep at the Somniel, or characters will go into your room where the character sleeps and talk your ear off. It's more Divine Dragon worship, sometimes it's about prayers, sometimes it's about them, and sometimes conversations will continue on and on back to how to serve the Divine Dragon. As if the man or woman is something to be gawked at with conversations in an art museum. I found this aspect of the game creepy, and honestly the game could have been done without it. This is also me watching as many as I could to find any redeeming factors, and I can only say it's better here by a small margin than in Fire Emblem Three Houses tea events. Since they can talk about their lives, and you learn more about the character a bit, but the fact they talk to him or her and pray while they're sleeping only to wake up to no one's surprise why is frankly weird and again not right. Let them sleep for goodness sake, man. I wouldn't want someone to talk my ear off when I'm trying to sleep. I also don't like how the DLC and Nintendo Switch Online features seems geared to incentivize consumers to pay for membership or the DLC. For the DLC, if you buy it now, you get stat items, 30% off in item and armor shops, emblem rings, and more in the coming waves, along with story content. For Nintendo Switch Online features, there's two modes you cannot play without going online. Seeing deployment rankings and other stuff you couldn't use without paying Nintendo. And while this can be remedied using a 7-day free trial, what if you already used the 7-day free trial on an earlier game? This ties back into what I said earlier about classes and experimentation, but this time I'll focus on the Nintendo Switch Online features. Since you had to pay or use a limited 7-day free trial to access online components like co-op with another partner and challenge maps in relay trials, battle against other players on edited maps in Outrealm trials, profile cards you can't send unless you're online in deployment rankings, so if you want to access these features, you better cough up money to Nintendo. Certainly, as a business, they have a right to manage how they price their downloadable content and pricing their online functionality. It just grinds my gears to see content that could have been available for others being withheld until you give up money for the company, especially for online features. Can you imagine if Nintendo only allowed you to use your amiibos for a game, but only if you are currently a Nintendo Switch Online subscriber? I love Nintendo, but sometimes some of their decisions leave me shaking my head sometimes. Anyway, moving on. The villains are flat and garner weak sympathy to think of them as human when they're not. To expand on this, some scenes showcase the villains and demonstrate their power to a decent degree. However, without going to too specific detail, the execution of their villainous ways leaves much to be desired. I could not help but feel their actions in some maps can be terrifying, but on other maps leave me puzzled since they can do this extent using their power, so why don't they do it again? This ties back into the plot and how the Divine Dragon will overcome everything if we listen to them. I also did not like one villain who kept being a broken record saying the first letter F with the last letter Y in nearly all the scenes when they would come up. Come on, man, don't guilt trip me with that word. It does not work at all, and it is incredibly repetitive to continue using that word as if the player will miraculously forgive every single one of your atrocities. Granted, not all villains fit this mold, and I found some, more than others, who rise above this occasion. However, it does not excuse the fact the villains could have been more compelling. I get the point developers were trying to make with the characters, but it just seems short. Give us scenes making them more human, give me scenes showing the struggle, and demonstrate their villainous ways without remorse. That's all I have to say for my critique of the game. Now let's move on to what the game does well to offset the boatload of criticism I've talked about so far. The game is a wonderful return to classic Fire Emblem, revitalizing the weapon triangle with a break system in place, making enemies feel challenging even on normal. The overworld is gorgeous, and I had fun using the free camera to inspect the whole world and see what nooks and crannies our main party could potentially travel to. There is a large number of recruits even towards endgame, which is fleshed out with full support conversation logs you can see. Out of my whole playthrough, I only completed one character's full support conversation logs. The rest I was only able to get a small, decent chunk from my army alone. I love the no durability on my weapons, so I can keep on using them without fear of them breaking down on me. Except for staves, of course. Those you will need to buy again. The voice acting is pretty good. A good majority of the cast has a decent amount of range throughout the game, and I didn't find any bad voice acting at all. I found the emblems to be pretty powerful on normal difficulty, and I loved using them throughout my playthrough. It never gets old attaching a lord or not lord on a unit and letting them go attack a decent army against them, only for my unit to emerge wounded, but still okay. There are various powers in each emblem, and I use each of them to their fullest effect throughout my playthrough. I had fun splitting my armies and designating whichever unit needs an emblem more, and a lot of maps give you the option to split your armies 2 ways or 3 ways. The combat is enjoyable to try out different strategies, and thankfully there's quite a bit of good map design here to give players much freedom to do what they want. especially when you have resources on that map that could turn the tide of battle, like cannons, ballista, and some have even more interesting gimmicks, so those were pretty cool to play in. I am pretty impressed at the level of polish here, not just in animations and support conversation scenes, but the cutscenes, stills, artwork, and opening. The background and colors used throughout the game here are vivid and varied, and I have no complaints in seeing every color of the rainbow here. I also had no slowdown, bugs, glitches, or crashes throughout my playthrough, and pretty much every battle and more were smooth. For what it's worth, I did enjoy some good story beats as I progressed through the game, and there were a couple of surprises I didn't expect. Some paralogues, at least the ones I finished, were also a very nice touch in seeing my old favorites come back to life, even if it's in emblem form, and fighting on their maps from their respective games filled my nostalgia with great joy. I feel the game is worthy of playing if you're still hungry for more Fire Emblem, despite my long criticisms of the game. I sincerely hope my review still gets you to buy the game. My intention is never to gatekeep it, but merely to inform others what I feel could have been done better with evidence and move on from there. And while Fire Emblem Engage is an alright experience for me, others out there rate the game higher than me, and that's fine. That's their experience of what the game means to them, and that's fair. I have loved the series since starting with Awakening, and while I haven't played the rest in the franchise, it is still a favorite of mine in the turn-based genre. I'm just disappointed at the potential this game could have been and held solid throughout. And while I still have those feelings, it does not discourage me at all from telling every soul I can to buy the games in the franchise to keep it afloat. And I encourage anyone who has bought Fire Emblem Engage to play to the end, if you can, to make your own voice heard on what your experience is for Engage, and type out your thoughts. Doesn't even have to be as long as this. Short impressions are perfectly acceptable. Anyway, that's enough for me. This review got too long for my liking, but I feel I needed to type out what I wanted to say. So thank you for listening to this long review I've done for the game, and hope you guys take care.